Good morning, and thank you for joining us at TechFest today for our first breakout session, Onboarding a Fully Remote Workforce, Lessons from a Pandemic Hiring Surge, presented by Eric Schmuck from Philips. If you have questions for Eric, feel free to add them to the chat and we'll address them as we go along or at the end during Q&A. Before Eric gets started, I'd like to welcome Nate Homitsky from our event sponsor, Aerotech, to the virtual stage to get things kicked off. Nate, take it away.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm Nate Homitsky. I'm the IT manager for Aerotech, which is a high-performance motion control technology company headquartered in Fox Chapel area of Pittsburgh. For those of you not familiar with Aerotech, we engineer and manufacture mechanical devices like stages and motors, electrical devices like drives and controls, as well as design and create the software tools that go along with our mechanical and electrical devices. Things like GUIs for doing configuration and setup, APIs for integration with other tools, as well as some really cutting-edge optimization and diagnostic tools in our software products. So the last point I have before we get started is just that we are hiring. And if you haven't already, please check out the Aerotech company card on the sponsor site of the TechFest site. I know Allison's going to post a link here shortly to that. Check out our career site and specifically the software positions that are there. And if you're interested, please apply. I'll be at the networking events and I'll also be here the rest of this session in the Q&A, so feel free to reach out to me through that or LinkedIn as well. At Aerotech, our new slogan is "We build careers," and I can attest to that. I've been at Aerotech now for over 14 years. So so feel free to reach out. And with that, I'll turn it over to Eric, and thank you very much for your time.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I'm going to share my screen because I have slides. So let me share PowerPoint. Let's see if this works. Okay, so hopefully that's presenting. Let me know if it's not. So my name is Eric Schmuck. I'm a software technical leader at Philips. And what that really means is that the way we organize our Scrum teams and our feature teams, there's usually one technical leader on the team who's kind of the team anchor. So I'm not an HR person, I'm not in recruiting, but I am a software developer who has a passion for improving the quality of work that we do. So I got involved in some of the interview process before the pandemic, and Philips in Pittsburgh is sleep and respiratory care. So you can imagine when COVID-19 hit, as the manufacturer of devices that treat respiratory conditions, a lot of pressure was on us to deliver. So we had a serious problem with respect to the way that we were operating. So let's go back to 2019. So this is the 2019 model of interviewing and onboarding. Pardon my stick figures, but the point is, it's a decentralized model. So each individual manager had their own set of reports. They had their own set of teams. And that was working okay. You know, generally speaking, they would choose who they wanted to hire. They would choose how they onboarded these people. They would come into the program. They would start working. And since everybody was independent, it wasn't really a huge issue. We had some known problems with the decentralized model, and that is that smaller groups had less mature processes. So that means that when somebody had a small team, maybe they didn't really know how to onboard people because they didn't do it very often. The opportunities for better fits were missed. So let's say you interviewed 4 candidates and 2 of them were really outstanding. Really, 2 of them should have been hired, but you only have 1 spot. That other person doesn't really get hired. No strategic direction for talent in the sense that we don't necessarily know exactly what we're working toward, and instead we're just kind of doing ad hoc hiring. We're doing ad hoc strategic partnerships, and we don't have a plan. We don't have a roadmap. We're not investing in talent as a strategic capability of the program. And then finally, one of the problems we had was variable techniques in the interviewing process. I helped other groups do interviews, and frankly, some didn't really have a strategy for doing an interview. They would simply sit down and talk to the candidate and chit chat, and then they would say, well, did we get out of this interview what we really wanted? And it wasn't clear that they were getting the value from the process. They weren't learning enough about the candidates. They weren't digging deep beyond just a summary conversation. So in the problem with the onboarding, it was an inconsistent experience. I mentioned each manager had their own set of responsibilities. They had their own team. So if you joined team A that had a larger footprint and that team had a more mature interviewing and onboarding experience, then you would have a better experience than someone who joined a smaller team. The onboarding process relied on informal communication, which means that what I mean by that is that people would come into the program, they would get assigned a buddy or a partner, and they would kind of sit with that person for a few days or a week or something like that. And then they would more or less just kind of get involved in things through informal, kind of casual channels. They would just kind of learn by osmosis, which again, works great in 2019, but 2020 was about to change all of that. The onboarding process also kind of had unspecified goals and expectations. We all kind of intrinsically knew what those things were, but we didn't always have a stated objective of what we wanted to get from the onboarding process. So COVID-19 disruptions. So early part of, in January, February 2020, there's 8,000 China-based Philips employees. They notified the company of a really potential global problem. They said, hey, this COVID-19, this unspecified respiratory condition is going to cause a huge problem. We better get ready. So we immediately committed to increasing our ventilator production. In March 28, New York State requests 18,000 ventilators. Health and Human Services wants a stockpile of 120,000 devices. Normally, we made about 500 a week. So our Trilogy ventilators are one of the non-invasive vent device that is used to treat. It was originally conceived to treat COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, but it's also quite effective for COVID-19. So we made a commitment to scale to 2,000 units a week by May. We made a commitment to say we would scale to 5,000 a week by August. But it's really not as simple as just increasing the number of manufacturing people on the assembly line. We also had to add software features to support the COVID-19 requirements. And if you want to do that, you're going to need software developers, you're going to need electrical engineers, you're going to need mechanical engineers, you need a lot of other people. We also developed the E30 and E40 ventilators for emergency use, which is these devices were not designed before early part of 2020. We said we need something besides a Trilogy ventilator. So we were able to use our existing platforms to come up with a ventilator that was simpler to manufacture. But again, our devices are connected, which means they have software in them. And so we have to have software developers. A quote from someone at Philips is, a ventilator is a complicated product. It has more than 1 million lines of code. So there's embedded software inside the device. We have cloud-hosted endpoints for data payloads, and we have a web portal for patient management. So you can imagine if we want to actually roll out this new E30, E40 ventilator platform, we have to have the people and we have to have the brain power inside the company to be able to do that. So we had to embark on a journey that we called talent excellence. And that meant that we couldn't rely on the 2019 model of interviewing and onboarding, partially because we sent a lot of our folks home. And like every other company, we said we can't have people in the office. We had an open floor plan where people were about 4 feet apart or so. I kind of joke and said in that office, I could reach my arms out and I could touch one engineer on the shoulder on one side, another engineer on the shoulder on the other side. And if I rolled my chair back, I'd hit somebody else's chair. And if I stuck my arm out, I'd be blocking somebody's view of their monitor. So that's not sustainable in a COVID-19 environment. So we said, okay, we've got to send everybody home. But that means that 2019 decentralized model of interviewing and onboarding is not at all suitable to this new world that we're in. So we said we have to rapidly expand our software capabilities. We're going to do that through headcount expansion, but we're also going to do that through rapid onboarding. So that was the stated goal of this talent excellence initiative. So there were 3 basic pillars of this initiative. One was to centralize the interview process. So I mentioned some of the problems there was that smaller groups had less mature processes. So they were not aware of how to do good interviews, and that is, they weren't always efficient in terms of finding the talent they needed. So the interview process, there were inconsistent experiences, and also there were the problem that folks who were like the second best candidate wouldn't always get a job, and we were turning people away. So we needed to centralize that to take care of those 2 specific issues. We chose to add a bar raiser round to our interview. Now, a bar raiser, I think everyone just heard Amazon's presentation. That term bar raiser originated at Amazon. We borrowed the term, but we changed what it meant. So a bar raiser is somebody who is outside of the reporting chain for this particular position, but is also from a different group with a more mature interviewing experience. So someone who's done a lot of interviews, knows what to look for in candidates, and can offer an opinion about the candidate. The bar raiser doesn't have a veto power. The bar raiser doesn't have any kind of authority to say yes or no. Instead, the bar raiser just offers an opinion, and it's another voice to the hiring manager. The third pillar is a comprehensive onboarding curriculum. So the idea was that we wanted engineers to come into the program, learn how we write software at Philips, and then be able to be productive as quickly as possible. So this is a significant investment because we're basically going to do onboarding training. And someone who joins the program, instead of them sitting with somebody for a week and learning through osmosis, we're going to give them a course that they have to go through, and they're going to write code to learn how we write code. So a significant investment, and basically I was pulled off of feature development to build this curriculum and to lead it. And I'll tell you more about what that curriculum consists of in a few slides. So centralized interviews for engineering candidates. So one question I get commonly is, well, what are you looking for in these engineering candidates? Like, what does it mean to find people? So I say we assess people on two dimensions. One is cultural fit and one is technical excellence. So you can imagine there are people who are technically excellent but poor culture fits, or poor culture fits but really great culture fits but low on technical excellence. So the stars are who we need, the people who are great fits and they're also skilled in the technology stack we have. I kind of think of the other extreme as being kind of funny in the example. So if you imagine the rock star programmer, the person who says, I'm so smart, you can't even understand how smart I am, so you know, we're just not going to have a good interview. Or somebody who's so sure that they know what they're doing that they don't want to talk to other developers. Since we're very much an organization that relies on feedback and interacting with each other, we don't want that rock star programmer because that's going to poison the culture. I've actually had somebody in interviews say, you know, how much smarter they are than I am, and how I can't understand what they're talking about. Like, well, I guess we're done here if I can't understand what you're talking about. So that's somebody we don't want. On the other end, we can kind of imagine the really absurd situation where somebody's extremely likable but very unproductive. And to me, I kind of think about if you remember the old show Gilligan's Island. You know, everybody liked Gilligan, but Gilligan kept them from getting off the island. So those are people we don't want either. And then, of course, there's the most extreme example where somebody is low, and I got to wonder, is that a poor career choice, or are they in the wrong field because they're not technically excellent? They aren't great programmers, but they're also not good culture fits. So those folks, of course, are not who we want either. So how we interview now. So talent acquisition is a group in Boston, and they're charged with identifying candidates. So they open the funnel. They reach out to candidates whose resumes look promising, the folks who have what appears to be a great match in terms of their background and their experience and their education. They talk to the folks and say, would you like to interview for a position at Philips? The first interaction that anybody inside sleep and respiratory care has with that candidate is a technical interview and code screening. And that's often surprising to people that we do a technical interview first. But what we found is that there are a lot of candidates who are those professional interviewees, meaning they jump jobs a lot. And we were doing that kind of technical screening in the panel, and we found that there were folks who were really good at answering those questions. But then we give them a code screening and they're really bad. They can't solve a problem. They can't think through it. So we do those technical screenings and code screenings first so that we can identify how good are you technically. And then we try to solve the culture problem later on. So those who pass this technical interview and code screening are then passed into the manager panel, the senior engineer technical leader panel, bar raiser group, bar raiser interview, and then eventually a product owner and project manager panel. So I realize there's 4 panels. That usually takes about 4 hours. So it's sort of a pretty big commitment on somebody's part to sit through those panels. But the order is what I want to emphasize here, that we do those code screenings up front. And I know what people are going to say, you do code screenings. Well, if you type into Google code interviews, you'll get all kinds of great quotes. They're like, coding interviews are a disaster, or they're a terrible technical interviewing technique. They're offensive and disrespectful. And even inside Philips, this quote, an industry anathema, somebody actually said that inside of Philips to me and said that they did not think the code exercises in an interview was a good idea. I countered with, well, if you feel like they're a bad idea, then if you were going to hire a mechanic, would you ask them to fix the car? Or would you ask them, tell me about a time you fixed the brakes on a car, what was the major challenge? Or would you ask them, just show me how you'd fix this? I feel like a lot of times in these technical screenings, if we're respectful and we give people the information they need and we treat them with not putting them under a lot of pressure and we treat them well, these coding exercises can actually be a very valuable tool to identify technical talent. By asking these sort of behavioral questions, I think sometimes we don't really get great answers. One of the jokes I tell people is a common question asked in behavioral interviews is, tell me about a time you were in conflict with somebody and how did you solve it? Professional people almost always have a story to tell about how they interacted with someone. Nobody has ever said something like, oh yeah, I didn't agree with that guy, so I made a shank from a Bic pen and a ball of rubber bands and I stabbed that guy at the coffee pots. That would be an outside the box answer, and I think that would make everybody laugh, but nobody ever says anything like that. Everybody has an answer like, well, I talked to the person and we whiteboarded out the answer and I gave my point of view and they gave their point of view. And all of the answers that people give are usually about the same. And it's very hard to gauge whether somebody is really able to be in a conflict and able to resolve it. So that's where this coding exercise comes in, technical screening. So the candidate is presented with a unit test. If anyone, folks who are developers and software programmers on the call would maybe recognize this, but they're basically given criteria for an algorithm they have to write. And the exercise includes ambiguity, and the purpose of that is to encourage questions and discussion. The approach is not, I'm not grading the person, I'm not timing the person is not asked to write perfect code. Instead, the approach is pair programming. So both of us are able to type on the screen at the same time, and the person is asked to implement a method. So for example, in this case, sum of primes, the sum of the primes gives the expected value. So we give them 2, 3, and 5, and then they have to write an algorithm that shows that it's given 2, 3, and 5 that 10 comes out. Since they're able to type at the same time, I can contribute code, they can contribute code. I'm not looking for things like, did they remember to put all the semicolons in the right place? Instead, I'm looking to see, well, how did they approach the problem? So one question I might ask or might expect the candidate to ask is, well, what happens if I'm given a number that isn't a prime? Like, what if somebody gives me a 4 in this list? Do I have to be concerned about that? So that would be something that I would want that person to kind of stumble on that question and ask. And then we can talk about what the possible answer is. So like I said, the early technical screening in this case identifies strong thinkers, people who kind of delve through all of the typical questions and typical problems that we have in software programming, and it eliminates those professional interview candidates, people who jump jobs a lot and they're just really good at answering those interview questions. The assessment, I've passed people, I've recommended people who didn't really write all that much code, but instead they asked really great questions. And I've also failed people who wrote perfect code. I once had a candidate who said, yeah, I understand this question. And then he held his hand up to the screen to tell me, stop talking. And then he proceeded to type. And every time I tried to say something, he's like, nope, I'm working. And that person is a bad culture fit. So he was technically excellent, but he fit into what I consider that rock star programmer kind of level. And somebody it would not be great. I've had people who have hung up on me in the middle of this, people who seem to be doing really well in the Q&A section of an interview, but you give them a problem like this, and suddenly their internet connection is unstable, and they just disappear. Folks who have said, they don't have any idea what to do. If somebody says, I really don't know how to solve this question, I think that's an okay answer, because nobody has ever given a problem and said, you have 20 minutes to solve it, go. Instead, it's an opportunity to talk it through. So I give people some advice, I give people some suggestions, and then going back to that conflict resolution question, sometimes I give people bad advice just to see if they'll push back. I'll give an example of something that could be implemented as a loop, and I'll see, instead I won't implement it as a loop, I'll implement it kind of in a different way, just to see if they'll say, yeah, I see what you're going for there, but I think we could do it a better way. Or I'll derail somebody on purpose with an interruption just to see how they respond to that. It gives you some idea of how somebody's going to interact in a real world working situation. Now, I never push people to the point that I stress them. I always try to do it in a very respectful, kind of quiet sort of way. I think one of my great strengths is that I'm not offensive, and I'm not in your face, and I'm not pushy. But I do kind of ask those questions because I feel like that's the kind of thing that happens to us. We can be in the middle of writing code and somebody asks a question, and then you have to be interrupted. And if somebody gets annoyed by that, especially in an interview setting when you should be on your best behavior, that tells me a lot about what that person is really like. So some of the dimensions of evaluation. I'm not looking at, is it right? I guess I am looking at it, is it right? But not only is it right. So were the requirements satisfied? What was the code quality? Like, did they write one letter variable names? We know that to be a bad software practice. So I look for that. Is the solution extensible? Meaning, did they write just what the test case solved, or did they think about all the other possible test cases? Did they use the tests to guide their development, or did they run them only at the end once they thought they had the right answer? And then how much interviewer assistance there was, meaning how much did I do? I've certainly been in interviews where people were not qualified for the position, and I wrote all of the code. I did the entire problem for them, and they were just kind of along for the ride. And then I mentioned before the interaction discussion style, and that's really the value of the coding exercise up front, with the question that sort of deliberately has some problems in it or has some ambiguity, because then I can see, well, how did they tease apart the question? What did they want to know before they started writing the code? So I kind of went through some of this already, but to summarize it, the centralized screening approach, since the single individual leads all screens for engineering candidates, and I do them all, and I think I did about 120 screenings last year from about May until September, October. I am able to look at every single candidate who comes in for every engineering role inside Sleep and Respiratory Care's Enterprise Software Applications Group. And unselected high-performing candidates then can be evaluated easily for other positions. They've already gone through the screening process. I already said this person is good, but maybe they had 2 great candidates and they weren't selected. Well, that's okay, because we've already screened them for a similar position. We have 5 or 6 engineering managers who each have 20 or so reports. So almost always somebody has an open position. So let's say I screen for manager A, and I say this person was really good. They really understood everything about what we were doing, and they had a great mastery of our technical stack, and culturally they were ideal, but they weren't selected for some reason. Well, when manager B has an opening, I can immediately say, hey, I screened somebody 2 weeks ago that would be really great for this position. Have talent call that person and see if they're still interested, because they would be a great fit for your team. So I mentioned a little bit about the bar raiser already. Bar raiser round is something that Amazon popularized, but like I said, we take a little bit of a different take on it. We have a different spin on it. So it's always somebody from a different group. It's outside the reporting chain. So it's somebody who is not in our specific group who does these interviews for us. And they're really looking for culture fit and behaviors. They're focused on the individual's long-term prospects for success rather than just for a specific role. So let's say you were interviewing for an entry-level software developer. We want somebody who can do that job, but the bar raiser is also looking at that person to see if that person was going to grow into something beyond that entry level. Is that person content to be what we would call a CG50 software engineer? Or is that person going to be successful in the long term? Is that the kind of person we want to bring into the organization and have them be with us for a long period of time? Generally, they use a STAR technique to ask questions. So situation, task, action, results. That's a common interview technique. Some of the bar raisers use the behavioral questions. Some of them, since we're hiring a lot of software developers, they use the coding interview also. So they'll ask somebody to write some code and then they'll talk through it. I believe at Amazon, and I could be wrong if anyone's on from Amazon and they know for sure, I believe bar raisers there actually have like a veto authority where they can say this person is not the right person, therefore we shouldn't hire it. Hire the person. But bar raiser in Philips is just another voice. It's just an outside person who, and the authority remains the hiring manager. I think it would be a very awkward conversation if the bar raiser said, this person is terrible, and the hiring manager says, yes, but I'm going to hire this person anyway. I don't think that's ever happened because the hiring manager is usually in agreement, and the reason we have bar raisers is to provide that feedback. But I suppose that could happen. And if the hiring manager was extremely sure that this person was the person they wanted, then the bar raiser's feedback would just be documented, and it would be part of that that hiring decision. But the authority is retained by the manager.
Hey, Eric, we have a question that came.
Uh-huh.
Pardon the interruption. We have a question that came in related to your hiring in the bar raiser right now. It's from Jane, and she asks, what is your Boston group looking for on resumes to pass them to the tech screen? How do you deal with inbound applications instead of people you specifically reached out to?
So the Boston-based recruiters, they want job specifications, right? So they're usually not engineers. They're talent folks who are in that HR role. So they want to know, well, what programming language are you using? What kind of database do you use? What kind of techniques should I look for on the resume? How many years of experience should I try to find? So they want those kind of traditional job descriptions. And then once the candidate is identified and they reach out to that person, then they'll send the resume on to me saying, here's somebody I found who seems to be a good fit on paper. I talked to them and they seem to be a good fit culturally too. Can you do the screening? So that's where the traditional role is kind of as the person who goes out and finds those people, what I would call the acquisition role or the talent identification process, is not really all that different than it was a couple of years ago. But now instead of doing the talent acquisition that leads into the panels, which would then eventually include that technical screening, we've reversed the order and we've added this bar raiser round. Does that answer the question? Okay, I hope so. If not, we can come back and we can talk a little. Okay. And then I guess the last point on the slide was the logical question to ask is, well, who's a bar raiser? What does it mean to be a bar raiser? Can anyone be a bar raiser? So historically, we've selected best of the best engineers. We have a group in Philips called the Software Center of Excellence. Philips being an 80,000 person company. We have a group in the Netherlands that looks across the portfolio of all of their software products and all of our software platforms. And they give advice and they say, you should be doing this process or you should be adopting these practices. And among those things are, they say what does it mean to be a great software engineer and what does it mean to do good interviews? So the bar raisers are trained by the Software Center of Excellence on how to do these interviews. Okay, so after the hire. So pre-pandemic, very focused on in-person activities, meaning that a new candidate comes in the building or a new hire comes in the building, we give them a tour, we show them where the coffee pots are, we show them where the restrooms are, we give them a desk, they meet everybody, everybody shakes hands and goes to a conference room and there's a team lunch. None of that, of course, is possible in the pandemic. They would do their own computer setup and access, meaning that someone would come and help them with their computer, make sure that everything is enabled and they can get into all their accounts. And then they would meet the team and do a lot of paired working. And they would kind of get through that informal process in the program. They would learn how we write code just by being around it, by being immersed in it, kind of the throw me in the water and watch me swim kind of thing. That was the way we onboarded people. So our talent excellence approach is a lot more deliberate and a lot different. So on somebody's first day, I always meet them at about 9:30 in the morning on Monday. We have a virtual welcome session. I also send out an announcement to the entire program saying, this person has joined the program. They are working on this area. Their expertise is in this particular aspect of software development. They're reporting to manager A. And please give them a big welcome. And I include a picture, and usually, if the person's okay with it, I include some kind of fun fact or some kind of hobby that they've sent me, just to kind of humanize it a little bit. So that way, everybody knows their name, everybody knows what they're working on. So I do this over email, and we also use Slack so that everyone can get that message. We changed our computer setup and access to a self-service computer setup. So when somebody joins the program, we have, of course, a global Philips IT help desk. I put in a ticket and I have the computer sent to them. And then I email them the instructions on how to get things set up for themselves for the first day. Because since there's no central office, there's no IT help. Previously, people would come into the building, they would plug their computer into the hard line, into the Philips network, and then they would be able to access things, but that's not possible from home. When we initially went to a home-based model, we had kind of a chicken and egg problem where the IT help desk was reluctant to send credentials to any place other than people's Philips email address. And I pointed out, well, if you need your credentials to get into your Philips email address and their credentials are only in the Philips email address, then I have a chicken and egg problem, right? Because I've locked my key in my car and I need the key to unlock the door to get the door open to get my key, but the key is in the car, so I'm stuck, right? So the self-service computer setup allows us to manage that process. We are able to send certain credentials to personal emails under personal email accounts under certain circumstances to get them started. So to solve the team, the paired working, we have a guided learning curriculum, and I'm going to talk more about that. A very significant investment. Most of my time last year was spent developing this onboarding curriculum. So the goal was to have a consistent, coherent experience that prepares new hires to join the program with the goal of making contributions as quickly as possible without impacting their team's velocity negatively. So you can imagine when a new person comes in, there's a disruption to the team, and the team has to stop what they're doing and help this new person get onboarded. Since we were in the middle of trying to get these new ventilators rolled out, we really couldn't afford those kinds of disruptions. So I had to develop this curriculum to help people get to the program as quickly as possible. So I use the guiding principle of tell me and I'll forget, show me and I might remember, and involve me and I'll understand. So that's a Chinese proverb that I've always thought was really really profound. So I thought, okay, that's a great one, and that should be my guiding principle when I develop a curriculum. So the question is, well, what is a curriculum exactly? So it's a series of related technical sessions needed to complete in sequence to understand the program and the technology. So it takes about 10 to 20 hours, depending on which curriculum you're doing. The curriculum is broken down into sessions, and each session covers one topic. So the time required to develop this mostly was because I was producing in-house videos. I may include an external learning, a mandatory external learning like a YouTube video or a book or a chapter from a book or a blog post or something they have to read. I sometimes include an exercise to reinforce a concept. I sometimes include a quiz to verify the understanding of the concept. I tell people that my quizzes are not graded in the sense that, yes, it'll tell you you got 4 out of 5 right. But the grading is anonymous from my point of view in the sense that I don't know that you took it. Instead, I know that somebody took it and that person got a 4 out of 5. So it reinforces the concepts from their point of view. And from my perspective, it tells me, am I asking the right questions? Am I covering the material in a way that's understandable and digestible? I give people advice also to say, well, leave the quiz open in one window while you're watching the video in the other window, because the quiz questions are in the order of the in-house produced video, so you can know whether or not you're really understanding the material. And as you're reading through the quiz questions, if you see the answer to the third one, that tells you you're in the right area. That tells you how much progress you've made. I almost always include a link for further reading, and usually my sessions inside the curriculum take about an hour to complete. So if it's 1 hour, then you can do the math and say, well, there's about 15 sessions in a curriculum. So the logical question now is like, well, what does this actually look like? So there's 4 specific training curriculums. So the fundamentals is a non-technical onboarding that everyone must do in the first 1 to 2 days, suitable for all hires. So that means Java programmers, UI developers, Scrum Masters, product owners, business analysts, anyone who joins the program can do the fundamentals onboarding. And they should come out of that on about a Wednesday or so after their first day, if they started on a Monday. By Wednesday afternoon, they should have some pretty good understanding of how we write software at Philips, what the expectations are of new engineers, what the expectations are of them. And then if you're a technical hire, you would go on and do other curriculums. So the foundations curriculum is mostly things like MongoDB, Java, how to do SSH configuration to get onto remote boxes, microservice architectural patterns, Cloud Foundry, how to do engineering testing. It has to be completed before they are assigned to their team. So if you think back to a couple of slides ago, and I said to minimize the disruption to the team, a new hire who does this foundation curriculum should have such a mastery of what we do and how we do it that when they get to their team, they're immediately productive. And one way I enforce that is there's a capstone that they have to do. So this capstone exercise consists of a Java microservice that frankly, I just made it up. And it consists of all the same architectural patterns that you would expect to see in a, air quotes, real microservice. But they have to go to Rally, find the user story, pull that code down to their machine, make the branch that they need to make, apply the changes to it, push it back up, get it onto Cloud Foundry, and then attend a 1-hour review with me where I look at their solution and I bring my version of the solution and we talk about it. And I ask them, what was hard about this? What did you not understand? What was easily digestible? What made sense? What didn't make sense? And we compare notes. And that's not to say that I have the right answer and they have the wrong one, but I may have a different understanding than they have. So it's helpful in that sense. They can see what a different answer might look like. So once they're assigned to their team, I ask them to continue on with the curriculums. So the practitioner curriculum is completed concurrently with onboarding to their team. So I tell them, spend about half your time on this practitioner curriculum and half your time on the features that are assigned to your team. The Scrum Master should only count that new person's time as about 50% because they're going to be doing this other curriculum. So they learn about feature toggles and continuous integration, the merge review and code review process. They learn about test-driven development and how we do clean code at Philips. And again, there's a capstone. So once they complete the capstone and mark them as having completed this exercise, if they feel like it, they can pursue the next level, which is the master curriculum. And I always tell people, don't do that until you're about 6 months into the program. If you try to do it right after you join, you're not going to understand much about what some of these things are. But after about 6 months of experience, you should understand what some of these technologies are and how to apply them. So they learn about Redis and Neo4j. Those are both persistence technologies we use. They learned about how to remotely debug and profile an application. And again, there's a capstone exercise to enforce all of that learning. And while all of that is going on, we assign a specific buddy, which means that there's somebody who is assigned to that person. They act as a mentor for the new hire. That person needs to be an expert in the domain and the ways of working of the team. So it should be somebody on the team. And really one of the things that the buddy does is ensure active participation in all of the ceremonies, like the Agile methodology says we should do a retro and we should do planning. We found that remote new hires tend to be very quiet. And it's a combination of reasons. And one is they feel like they don't really understand what's going on. They feel like there's somebody new. They feel like they don't really have anything to contribute. But since they aren't participating, the concern is, well, are they really learning? And the buddy has the responsibility and specifically charged with talking to that person after and before those sessions to say, does this make sense? Do you know what's going on? Do you know what questions do you have about what just happened or what's going to happen next? So to give you some idea, this is the anatomy of a session. So I just talked about what a session looks like. I always give them a title just so that they have some idea of what they're working on. I specify a duration. I said I try to target an hour, but some of them are 30 minutes. Some of them run a little bit longer than an hour. And I describe the summary or goal of what they should be learning. So in this case, they were talking about how to use tunnels to access secure infrastructure, like a secure database that's hidden behind a firewall. Things hosted on Microsoft Streams are videos that I record. So in this case, I recorded 2 separate videos. They're usually about 7 to 10 minutes apiece. You can see here there's a required exercise. So they have to do something in order to demonstrate learning and demonstrate that they have mastered it. The side effect is that while they're doing these things, they're also actually secretly setting up their computer to be able to be functional on their team. And if they have a problem, since I do this all the time now for everybody, I can help them through that process, as opposed to them being confused and having to send out like a Slack message like, can anyone help me set up my SSH key for Bastion access? Well, they can just ask me directly because I did it last week with somebody and 2 weeks ago with 3 or 4 people before that. So in this case, I have an external learning. I found a nice YouTube video that's pretty short, and it describes what SSH tunneling is. So I try not to explain the concept from scratch, but instead my content is really specific to how do we apply it? What do we use it for? And how are you going to find this on your team? Like, how is your team going to employ this technology or employ these techniques? So if somebody is really not familiar with it, then they could watch that YouTube video and come away with a much deeper understanding of what we're trying to do. This one has an example as a quiz it's associated with it at the bottom. And again, the quiz is not intended for me to like grade people up or down, like you only got a 3 out of 5, therefore you failed. Rather, it's if they take the quiz and somebody gets 3 out of 5, it tells me that I haven't explained something very well, or I asked a bad question in the quiz, or I need to revise the order of the sessions because something isn't being clearly understood. So the Capstone exercise is a simulated work experience. I kind of talked a little bit about this, but it's a phony user story. We use Rally. They're required to pull down a simple application that doesn't have all the business logic that you'd have to have a lot of domain logic. They're expected to branch and modify the code and then create a push and a merge request of it. The work has to meet the definition of done, which means that according to us, you're not done until you have a branch build that passes, successful deploy to a test space, and all of your engineering tests are passing. There's a dedicated Slack channel for Q&A, so if somebody says, I have no idea what to do, I'm completely stuck, or I don't know how to deploy to the test space, then I answer those questions and I'm able to jump on and say, well, let's meet and let's talk about it, and let me show you how to do that. In order to get credit for the actual work done, they must complete a 1-hour capstone review. So as I said, they bring their code, we compare it, not to say that I have the right answer or the wrong one, but it's just different. And then once they complete that capstone review, they're eligible to join their team after completion. So until that time, they're doing nothing but the foundation level training. So somebody might join the program, do the foundation and the fundamentals, and really not even meet their team until perhaps as much as 2 weeks after their start date, because they've been working on this content. The downside to that is, again, they're not really familiar with who they're going to be working with directly necessarily. But once they join their team, their presence shouldn't really cause any kind of negative slowdown or negative velocity impact on their team, because that person should join the team and they should know how to make code changes. The only thing they wouldn't know is, well, what code changes am I making? And that's the responsibility of the team to onboard them. So I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about who exactly this is targeted at. So for example, who we hire. This list is software. We have software engineers, we have software test engineers, product owners, scrum masters, project managers, product designers. So all of these folks are eligible to do this curriculum. So actual job positions that have been hired in the recent past and part of that hiring surge, we had marketing managers, we had iOS mobile app developers, global campaign managers, architects, engineers, machine learning engineers. And then to me, the sweet spot is really the software engineer of Java Spring and software engineer Java Spring and test. Those Java engineers, whether they're what I call the vanilla software engineers or the software engineer and test, they really get the most value out of the training and onboarding curriculum because we hire so many of them. And we're constantly looking for that level of talent. We're looking for those people. And the onboarding curriculum allows those folks to learn not just how to write software, but how we write software and what the things they need to know to be able to be successful on their team. So I probably need to mention the technologies that we use. The Java Spring Framework, like I said, is kind of the most common thing. We have several different database technologies. We use MongoDB. We use as a operational data store for our microservices. We use Neo4j. We use some relational databases, but not as many. We have Elasticsearch, Kafka, Python. We use Cloud Foundry as a deployment platform. We still have some C# code, although we're moved away from a lot of those things. Skills we hire, we look for developers who are talented at coding, writing code. Automated testing is huge at Philips because we try so hard to not have manual testing. A lot of our software is asynchronous, which means there's no person sitting at the console or sitting in the browser clicking. Instead, things are happening behind the scenes. So that automated testing is absolutely essential. And then we look at requirements writing. We found that a large majority of our defects, maybe as many as half, are attributable to misunderstood requirements and requirements that were just not implemented correctly because of somebody wrote something and somebody else interpreted it, and the author and the reader weren't on the same page. Beyond the technical skills, we look for extreme ownership. People who are willing to take something from inception to implementation. They have to be self-starters with a investigative and curiosity, a high level of curiosity, and they have to be comfortable working in an agile environment. I think the model of Scrum, which says there are no disruptions to the team, and we work in 2-week sprints. We try to adhere to that, but the pandemic demonstrated that sometimes we have to be even more agile than agile would not normally prescribe. Sometimes there are things we have to say. I know you're in the middle of a sprint, and I know you're in the middle of a program increment, but you're going to have to change. You're going to have to pivot because E30, E40 ventilators have to be out by 6 weeks from now because New York needs ventilators. So that was a huge learning for us and kind of a mental change in the way that we operate.
Hey, Eric.
Uh-huh.
Before you move on, I think we're getting toward the end, but we had a question that was related to 2 slides ago before the hiring at Philips one, if you want. And it was a question from Jean again saying, did you or do you hire and onboard juniors through this process?
Yes. So the onboarding curriculum is applied to both senior and junior engineers. So if somebody is a recent graduate from a college or university, they would probably actually benefit the most from some of this stuff because we're showing them not just how, hopefully how we write software at Philips, but also best practices for the industry. Hopefully those are one and the same, that those best practices in the industry and what we're doing are in fact the same. But the senior engineers also get value from it because they may come in with an understanding of how software is written, but they may not know how we write software. So the example I always use is our commit messages have to include an active user story or a defect ID. So you can imagine somebody joins the program and they say, well, I made a commit, why can I not push it? Why is it being blocked? And the answer is, well, because your commit message doesn't follow the right syntax. Well, they would discover that pretty early on, but the simplest way is for them to discover it during training and onboarding as opposed to once they're on their team, and then they have to figure out how to go back through the history and change their commit message. So the answer is sort of everybody does it, and there's a reason everybody does it to help ensure consistency and best practices. So I'm out of slides, in fairness. I've reached the end. So if there's more questions, I'd be happy to answer anything about it. I think the lesson is that inside your organizations, you may be able to apply some of those same techniques. Think about how you're onboarding people, how you're interviewing people. I think I coined the term the riot activities: recruiting, interviewing, onboarding, and training. And unfortunately, it makes the word riot. And I say, well, it's because if you think about it, it probably is a riot. In a lot of organizations, that's just sort of everybody does their own thing, and it's a little bit of chaos. But if you think about how you organize those activities, you can create a coherent, consistent experience for people that makes them want to be part of your organization, and it also trains them to be to switch positions more easily. So once they come into the program, they recognize, okay, maybe this is done on this way in this team, but it's done over here in this team. Oh, but onboarding, everybody does it the same way. So that helps enforce that consistency.
Thank you, Eric. We do have 3 questions in the chat, and I will go in the order they were received. Just a reminder, we do have 11 minutes left in this session, so there's your time warning. But let's jump right into questions. We have one from Colin Dean asking, I'm interested in your metrics around professional interviewees and what sends up flags when you see a resume or behavior in an interview. That's a great question. So the quantitative analysis of candidates is really a challenge for us. And that's why I go back to the code interview, the way that I screen the people, and the grade that I give them, or the location I put them on the matrix. I don't necessarily say that somebody is a 3.7 or a 2.6 or a 1.5, because you could be very high on some dimension and very low on another dimension, and yet still be a great hire. So if you take the example, the extreme example of this slide where I say somebody's high, would you rather have somebody who is
high on this dimension, a little bit lower on the culture fit, or would you have somebody higher on the culture fit and lower on the technical dimension? I don't know the answer to that. I think that's really a matter of personal preference. We've sometimes agonized over making somebody an offer because a hiring manager will say, I really like this person, but are they technically good enough? They're really great at cultural fit. They punch they hit all of the green check marks. You know, they're eager, they want to learn, they want to do a great job, but are they technical enough? And then vice versa. They're very technical. They know all of the things we use. They're experts in MongoDB, and they're experts in microservices, and they're experts in Java, but are they a cultural fit? So I think we're still working toward trying to find that metric, the quantitative analysis that allows us to identify candidates and say, this one is a hire, that one is not a hire. There's still a bit of qualitativeness in there, but I think a process like this where you're dealing with people is always going to have some qualitative aspects to it. I don't know you're ever going to want to get to the point where you can score people and they go, that's who we want.
Thank you, Eric. We have a next question from Michael Higgins asking, as the initial technical screener and the owner of the curriculum, do you worry about being a bottleneck for hiring and onboarding? And then jokingly, do you ever get to take a vacation?
Do I ever get to take a vacation? Yeah, I do. In fact, I'll be on vacation next week. Yeah, I understand the concern. Is it possible that I'm the one who's preventing people from getting jobs? Yeah, that's crossed my mind at times. But I think what we're doing now with the bar raisers, we're adding this capability. We're replicating this model out to other groups, and even internally, we're identifying new people to help in this process. The last year was such an unusual year that we had to do everything we could to get this up and going as quickly as possible. So we were looking at trying to have we were resource starved with respect to software engineers, and frankly we really couldn't afford to pull people off of writing code to be able to do these interviews. So yeah, your question is a fair one. Is it possible that I'm the bottleneck? It is, but talent is also working really hard to make sure that there are other folks like me and that we're reproducing this model in other places.
Thank you for that, Eric. Our next question comes from Matthew Kirby asking, do you typically hire graduates from technical boot camps, or is it generally a requirement for a degree from an accredited university? Does this also typically screen you out from reaching the interviewing process?
So that initial reach out happens outside of my control, right? I'm not involved in the identification of candidates. The sourcing, I guess you'd call it, of candidates is done by talent. Talent acquisition will send me resumes, and I almost never decline a screening. If talent says we should talk to this person, then my answer has almost always been yes. There's only been a handful of times where I've said, no, I don't feel like this person is somebody I want to talk to, and their educational background doesn't often fit into that criteria. I've worked enough now with a lot of our engineering managers that I kind of know what each manager is like. We have one particular manager who says, I don't care what your background is, I don't care what school you went to, I want smart people who are eager to learn, and even if you don't know the technology we use, if you're interested and driven and you want to learn it, that's who I want. We have another manager who says, I really want people who are fits with my technical profile. So if I say I need a Java Spring developer, that person better have X number of years of Java Spring on their resume, or else this person's going to be rejected flat out. So I've kind of learned about the different preferences of each individual manager. We definitely hire people from boot camps. In fact, yesterday I had a screening with somebody who was attending Tech Elevator. So the university degree is not a prerequisite for any of our positions. We do like people to have work experience. We like people to have a drive and a passion for learning about the things that we use. But I wouldn't say that there's any specific requirement for any of our positions that say you must be X, Y, Z. I screen people, I give people the same screening regardless of their educational background or the number of years of work experience.
Thank you, Eric. Before I read our last question, I want to remind everyone that from 10 to 10:30 today, we have a networking session going on. That link is in the chat right now. It's also available to you in Sched. So that's my spiel. I'll ask our last question from Lisa Merwin. She asks, did you create this roadmap for your organization?
I did. So I wish I could say that this was a strategic vision that was created from my initiative, and that I had this all planned out. It probably isn't quite as strategic as the way it's presented here. You know, there were a little bit of soul searching and trying to figure out how does all this fit together. So the way that this happened in 2018 and 2019, I was doing interviews and I was helping with the interview process, and we discovered that the technical screening should be early in the process simply by failing a lot, and that's where that, you know, the old mantra "fail fast" comes in. So we were trying something that wasn't working, and we said, okay, let's reorganize how we're doing things. And then we also knew we had this onboarding problem, and there was an afternoon where I and a few other people who were in leadership positions inside the program, we were whiteboarding out like, well, how could we get people into the program faster? And we jotted down some notes and we said, yeah, we should have an onboarding curriculum. And then that idea was put on a sticky note and put aside. And a time went by where nobody really moved on it. And then we realized that we had this pandemic problem. We said, okay, let's dust off that sticky note. So what does it look like? What does success look like? And how can we make this happen? To our director's credit, he said, all right, you know, yes, you're a great developer and you write a lot of code and we need you in the program, but we really need you to stop writing code and help other people get into the program to help us write code, because no matter how much I could turn out, I can't turn out as much as, you know, 30 people. You know, like I said, I wish that I could say that our story was that somebody saw the value in this and we invested in it and we developed it, but some of it came about largely by accident. And that's kind of why I say it's lessons that Philips learned that maybe in your organization you can apply. You can take the benefit of the things that we experienced and apply it to your organization, and not have to go through that same kind of learning.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you to everyone for attending this session. We have no more questions in the chat, but I would encourage everyone again to come to the networking session starting at 10. And we have more breakouts coming up later today and a full day of programming available tomorrow. So I will hopefully talk to you again soon.
Thanks, everybody.